You're right there guys, this is Dale of the Lone Wombat Airsoft, and today we're taking a look at Matlock Combat Games, oddly enough, located in Matlock. Now, before we dive into the review, of course, you've got links on either side of me if there's a specific part you want to skip ahead to, but one thing I want to say before we dive into it is that while most of these video reviews are first impressions, this one certainly isn't. Now, Matlock Combat Games is a site I've been going back to for the best part of 5 years now, and indeed it's the site where I first discovered what airsofting actually was. So for full disclosure, you need to know that whilst I'm going to try and keep this review as impartial as possible and relate it to the day I last turned up, it's just something you need to be aware of as we go through this. And with that out of the way, we'll dive straight on into the review. So the site's located in Lant Wood, which is just outside of Matlock along the A632, otherwise known as Chesterfield Road. The site's very easy to access, however, if you're not keeping your eye out, you can miss the main entrance to the site. I'm just throwing up a Google Map image here of what the overall site is, and I've highlighted the area where the main entrance is. If you're coming down from Chesterfield on the A632, you want to take a left at the very top of the hill, and then it's an instant right into this gate. It's just a simple dirt track that you follow down into the site. It winds through a couple of the fortifications and leads you up into the safe zone. If you're using a sat-nav and postcode to navigate to the site, it tends to drop people a bit further south down on Lant Lane. So if that's the case and you haven't found the entrance, you just need to keep driving up that lane until you connect with the A632. In the car park, you can just drive straight on into the safe zone, but try and make sure that you be a bit considerate. It's fairly compact and there's going to be a lot more cars coming in behind you, so just make sure that you stack your cars neatly to make sure that there's room for everybody. So prices for the day are £20 if you're a member and £25 if you're not. If you're wanting higher kit on the day, then £45 is going to get your walk-on fee, a rental gun, full face mask and 3,000 rounds worth of ammo. You also get a cooked lunch as part of your walk-on fee. They do cook breakfast as well, but that's not included in the walk-on, and so you'd have to buy that separately if that's what you're interested in. There's also a small shop on site which sells all the airsoft supplies you might need, such as gas, ammo, grenades, that sort of thing. And you can buy like drinks and some small snacks from the shack on the side as well. In terms of setting up, they have a couple of large sheds if the weather's a bit bad, where you can take cover under. A couple of nice benches under there with some gun racks to prop your kit up. There's a couple of smaller benches dotted around the car park as well, but most people tend to set up out the back of the cars themselves. There is a bathroom on site in the form of a single portaloo, but in 5 years I've never used the thing because many people have braved the TERDIS over the years and not all of them have re-emerged, so I'd use that at your own risk. So to reiterate the fact that I've been coming here a few years, I might be a little bit biased when I say that the staff on site are spot on. However, whenever we get new people introduced to the site, they always get along with the people running it. In terms of things like the morning safety brief, it tends to drag on a little bit longer than I'd expect. They keep it quite informal, so you get people's attention still, but it's just a little bit longer than I would have liked, and you see a couple of people's attention waving towards the end of it, depending upon who's giving the safety brief. During the games themselves, however, you will always see at least one marshal at all times watching the players going on, and you have a fair few of them actually on the teams themselves playing alongside, so they get a more ground level perspective of what's actually going on, and they're definitely not afraid to call people out if they see some foul play going off. On the subject of non-hit taking and the like, on the last weekend it was generally good. There was one or two occasions that I spotted where people weren't taking their hits, but Matlock itself is a very hard site to determine whether someone is non-hit taking or not. This clip I'm just showing here, I'm full autoing into a guy that I can see, but because there's so much brackeny brambles and small twigs in the way, the terrain is just eating up all of the shots, even though to me personally I've got a clear line of sight on the guy. So I'd be very wary before declaring that someone isn't taking their hits. It's entirely possible that the shrubs are just eating all of your shots. In terms of the players then, they're all pretty solid. The fact that it's been operating for a while now, you've got a very strong recurring player base, and so you'll see a lot of familiar faces if you keep coming back to this site. And if you're new there, I think you're going to find it literally impossible to not get talking to some of the players there. Because of the way the safe zone's set up, you've always got a couple of people next to you with conversations going off that you can just easily pitch into, and everyone's very welcoming on the site, especially for new people. So overall then, I'd say the site is run particularly well. I like the fact as well that marshals have put in a lot more effort into the terms of games they're running these days. They've tried to make them a lot more interesting. But also one thing that stood out to me last weekend is the fact that they were perfectly okay with rebalancing teams. Now, usually this shouldn't be a point worth mentioning, it should be a standard across sites, but there's a fair few of them that will just keep teams fixed, even when one is blatantly stomping the other one for the entire day. So it's quite a refreshing thing for me to see that these guys are perfectly willing to rebalance teams to make it a bit more fair and a bit more fun for everyone involved. So the terrain on site is almost exclusively virgin woodland. Now, for the most part, these trees are just left to their own devices to do what they like, with very little in the way of maintaining the forest itself. So you will find a fair amount of fallen over trees to take cover behind, like with big uprooted dirt mounds to hide behind. But there are some distinct flavours of woodland in this relatively small space. You've got Beach Corner on the southwest side of the site, which has these tall, thick beech trees, which is very clear ground in between them, so they're very easy to run between. You get some solid cover behind these trees. However, it's very easy to get spotted in and shot whilst you're running between the large distance between these bits of cover. There are some like these thin reed-like plants in the middle of the map, which are quite easy to see people through and shoot them, but they can provide a very risky way of sneaking directly through the middle of the site to get the drop on other players, if you're good enough to do that. And then in the summertime, what you'll tend to find is a lot of ferns will just sprout up in the summer, so much so that if someone sees you and starts shooting at you, if you just hit the deck, you will vanish under a green canopy of these ferns and they'll just completely lose track of you. If you're the type of player that doesn't like getting down and dirty in the grounds, then be prepared to eat a lot of BBs. In the actual woodland itself, there's very little in the way of actual solid cover. The trees tend to be a little bit too thin for that, and if someone just moves a couple of feet to one side, they'll get a clear line of sight on you, unless you are down deep on the deck. The site is very flat with nothing in the way of actual hills. It does undulate a little bit, however, and there are some dirt mounds you can hide behind or at the base of trees. So if you want full cover in the actual woodland itself, get down on the deck. For the players who do like to keep their kit nice and pristine and dirt free, however, there are a fair amount of fortifications on site you can use. These range in terms of quality and the usefulness of protection against BBs. The ammo dump looked like it had seen better days when I last went there the other weekend, but then you get some places like the village, the mortar pits, fire support, that have all seen some fairly recent additions to them. What I'd particularly like to see is that in recent months they've actually started adding to this site, which is something that it desperately needed. So now in Beach Corner there's a brand new fortification set that wasn't there a few months ago. Now, I'm not suggesting that every time you're going to go it's going to be different, but it is nice to see that they're actually maintaining the site and adding new things to it now. So overall then, I would describe the terrain as very hard. Like, if you're not used to your woodland terrain, say that you're a CQB player and you're used to clear lines of sight and clear factory floors to run across, you are going to struggle here. The forest floor itself is very dense, with thick bracken always trying to catch on the edge of your gear as you're walking through it, and it can be quite uncomfortable when you hit the deck because you might land in a bramble pile. But this is the kind of woodland that I particularly enjoy because it's hard to be sneaky and it's hard to run fast through, so it actually improves your personal skills. Definitely not for everyone though. If you're a more indoor CQB focused player, you will struggle here. From the conversations that I've had with people that are those kind of players, it's not to their tastes. However, for everyone else, this is a great woodland site that I personally really enjoy. So over the years I've seen pretty much every game type tried at least once at this site, but I'll just give you a quick list of what we ended up doing last weekend I was there. To start off with, there was a quick infection game type just to get people moving and everybody into the spirit of it. There was a twist to this though, where once you were on the defending team and you were shot, you didn't instantly join the other team. What you then had to do was stand up and count to 10 loudly, and then you started on the other team where you stood. So what this did is it gave the defenders incentive to get the hell away from you, or just line up a shot and wait for you to count back in, or if they just ignored you at their own peril, you could just turn around and shoot people who were previously on your team.
Hits! 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, hit!
Then we had a capture the flag game type, whereby obviously two flags at bases on either end of the woodland, and one team had to hold their own flag and capture the enemy teams. This didn't come to a grinding halt at the midpoint like I suspected it would. There was actually quite a good bit of back and forth. Because the entire site was open to both teams, they were able to go around each other, so you would have both bases being attacked simultaneously, and then people on the attacking sides would just look over to the side and see the opposite team doing the attacking and then break off and engage them, and it just had a lot more fluid to it than several CTF games I played at other sites, so I particularly enjoyed that one. We also had a scavenger hunt game type, whereby objectives were just littered across the map, and regardless of how big or small they was, if they looked like a crate, a missile tube, a salad dish, anything, they could be brought to a neutral trader who was wandering around the map. The twist with that though is that he would not accept the things you bring to him unless it's clear of the enemy team, so he wouldn't trade with you unless the site's clear. Also, we had a couple of bodyguards going around with him who would shoot people on site if they raised their guns at them, so this caused a little confusion between the teams until they finally remembered what the actual game brief was, but that was a fairly enjoyable one as well. We had an attack and defend type thing where defenders would sit in the fire support base guarding a bomb case, and the attackers would win once that case was opened. Attackers won constant regen, but the defenders won one medic dead. What I like about this is the constant regen gives attackers incentives to push, and the one medic dead on the defenders made them cautious. They couldn't spread out and hinder the attackers before they even got to the base. They had to stay around the objective, particularly because the attackers didn't necessarily have to kill them all to win. So I like the way that that little edge was put onto that game mode. It made it a bit more interesting than it usually is. And then finally, to end off the day, we had a sweeping attack defend thing through the entire site, where defenders won instant one hit dead, but once they died they fell back to the next fortification in the line, and so on and so on, and the winning team was the one that could clear all of these fortifications the fastest. What I particularly liked was the fact that they've actually tried to put a lot of effort into making the games interesting and have unique twists on them. I did actually take a break from this site a year or so back because the games had gotten boring and stagnated. I'd seen them all. But I'm really quite happy to see that now they're actually really putting some effort into these to try and make them more interesting to play in. So ultimately then, is Matlock Combat Games worth a visit? Well, considering it's a site I've been coming back to for a fair few years now, I think it's safe to say that there is something about this site that I really enjoy. If you don't mind getting down on the dirt, getting fired from all angles in decent, thick woodland terrain, then this is definitely a site you should take a look at. If you're a more CQB focused player, however, you will struggle. It's not what you're used to, and a lot of people that are more CQB only players tend to not like it because of the obscured lines of sight and the fact that even if you see someone, you can't necessarily hit them. So, however, I would give it a try anyway. You never know, you might be a secret woodland player in there all along. So I really hope you've enjoyed this video review of the Matlock Combat Games site. If you have any questions you'd like to ask me or feedback you'd like to give, just leave it in the comments section down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And until next time, this has been Dale of Lone Wombat Airsoft.
Cool, let's take the dish.
You think the dish will be worth something?
Yes.
We need a moving team!
You think it won't be worth something?
Yeah, 20 points.
Hold this. Thank you. 3, 2, 1, and lift.
Straight onto the road.
Yep.
Yeah, no, go this way, go towards the road this way, they're coming up towards Mock Pit.
Roger.